No, you're not dreaming. Ultimate Spider-Man has officially returned into the Marvel comic space, and not just that, but the Ultimate Universe as a whole is making a comeback, though not the way that you think. After the Ultimate Invasion storyline, we essentially have a brand new Ultimate Universe from scratch, with a multitude of different things changing. And we're getting more new titles from Marvel, starting with issue 1. And one of the first solo books that's coming out is for the Ultimate Spider-Man. And this is where we see Peter Parker in a way that we didn't think we'd ever see him be in, and the storyline seems something that is very interesting and probably close to a lot of people's hearts. And no, this has nothing to do with the mainline continuity of comic books. This is its own separate continuity under the Ultimate Marvel brand. So if you want to start fresh with any of these new comics from start to finish, grab number 1 from the Ultimate Comics line. Now that brief intro out of the way, let me explain why I'm doing this. I usually cover anime and manga on my channel, but Spider-Man is a character and a comic that I hold near and dear to my heart. I've started getting back into comic books over the last couple months, and when I heard about the new Ultimate comic book line, I feel like this would be the best chance for me to just gradually stay up to date with a new line and new universe and storylines of comic books. That way I don't have to worry about all the different ones I can catch up on, and I can catch up on the mainline stuff on my own free time. And obviously with Spider-Man being the first one out, it's something I really just wanted to read right off the bat. And I figured I might as well do a little bit of an experiment, go back to my roots, as this channel actually was originally going to be a comic book / movie review channel until I decided to just go with anime and manga, and I have not looked back or regretted it since, as I enjoy what I cover. However, I just wanted to talk about this first issue because it is so good, and if this does well, I might just cover Spider-Man here on the channel. It's just like the only non-manga thing I do here on the channel. Heck, if this does well, maybe I'll make a separate channel just covering the Marvel stuff if I feel like it, or I'll do some Marvel comics here and there on the channel, primarily just Spider-Man related, because he is my favorite. Let me know in the comments down below for that, and if you enjoy my read-through / review of this first issue of Ultimate Spider-Man, please like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to show you guys enjoy the content I make here if you want to see more. And with that intro out of the way, let's get right into the very first issue of Ultimate Spider-Man. And first I gotta say, I love the first issue cover of Ultimate Spider-Man. There are a bunch of different variant covers, but for now, just stick with the main one, as it is probably just very classic and just beautiful in my honest opinion, because I like the classic suit and I like different variations on it. I like seeing different people's spins on it, and this one invokes classic Spider-Man, but also feels modern as well. Now, this issue actually starts off with a paragraph basically detailing the events of the Ultimate Invasion saga, as giving us a reason as to why we're in the place that we are. So let me give you a brief recap through this. 20 years ago, the Maker prevented a radioactive spider from biting a young Peter Parker. He likewise prevented the creation of any other superheroes and formed a secret council to rule the world from the shadows. When Tony Stark learned that dark history of his universe, he sought to undo it, prompting the Maker's Council to attack Manhattan, killing thousands and framing Stark for it. Peter has lived his life unaware of the Maker's Council or the truth behind the spider, but that is about to change. As we now cut to January of this year, with Peter Parker looking at himself in the mirror, sighing and saying, "Peter Parker, you are not getting any younger." As I gotta say, I like Peter with the beard. It's a classic dad look, but it also looks just incredibly cool and gives him a sense of wisdom throughout his life. Peter gets dressed, puts on his wedding ring, and goes out into the living room to meet his 2 children, Richard and May. And yes, this version of Peter is married and has 2 kids. This is something that's very nice. Peter goes over and sees if breakfast has been made and if there is coffee. Peter says, "Thank God for Mom," as off screen. MJ says, "Thank God for coffee." And I gotta say, Tiger, you look like you need it. Peter kisses MJ, saying good morning, as they are all about to get ready. As MJ says if he got any sleep last night, and Peter says kind of a little bit of both, not much, not a little, as she says that it's to be expected after you know what, as May goes over and finds this silver-like reflective ball in Peter's bag. But Peter grabs it out of her hand and says, "Not a toy, kiddo." He goes on to say, "But right now, I gotta run. I promised I'd head into the office and then we have the thing. But yes, we'll talk about everything later." MJ says count on it as Peter ends up leaving. He makes it to the Daily Bugle, where he has a job there, as he goes and meets Betty Brant. As they're wondering what's going on, J. Jonah Jameson comes in screaming, "Parker, Parker," as he runs into Peter in the office and says, "Oh, good morning, Peter," as he's like, no time for chit-chat, as he goes off calling for Parker, as he goes towards the managing editor's office, revealing Ben Parker. In this universe, Uncle Ben is alive, and he is the managing editor of the Daily Bugle, and he works with J. Jonah Jameson. The two of them have a bit of banter as Ben asks if there's something that Jonah needs. He says that there's a meeting at 4, and the ones in charge of the money basically are asking for management to show up, but he knows that Ben has this thing later, and asks if he wants him to move it back, but Ben says, no, it won't be a problem. I'll be back. As Jonah says okay, and motions towards Peter entering to get Uncle Ben, asking if he's ready. Ben says, I've been ready 15 minutes ago. Why are you late? As Peter just cheekily says, well, it's probably because I was neither on time or early. I feel Peter in this instance. I've had these moments in my life. I feel heard. Ben and Jonah end up being all cheeky with each other, being like, youth, am I right? Peter ends up saying you guys should have your own show, as they literally go off and have their own banter, and as we throughout this issue, Jonah and Ben kind of have some really good banter, and I would actually like to see like a side 3-issue mini comic of just the two of them just hanging out and saying their stuff. It just feels like a fun time. Ben and Peter get ready to leave, as Jonah stops Peter and asks him if he has a tie. Peter is stumped for a second and he's like, I don't think I've ever worn a tie. Jonah takes off his tie and says you gotta wear a tie, as he then fixes his tie to put it around Peter for this event. As he's doing this, Peter's asking Jonah how he thinks Ben is doing, and Jonah just jokingly says, have I ever told you how much we love to sit around and talk about our feelings, your uncle and I? As Peter's like, yeah, but how do you think he's doing? Jonah goes on to say, your uncle is the toughest son of a gun I've ever met. Asking him if he's okay is kind of like asking about the durability of stone or some other geological remnant of another time. Saying that, how about you and I, regardless of how it appears he's doing, keep a close eye out for any cracks you might see. Can we agree to that, Peter? Peter agrees, as now he's all ready to go off and he looks a lot more respectable. Peter thanks Jonah, as Jonah just says, if you really want to know how your uncle is feeling, you can always just ask him. Jonah sends Peter off by saying, I'm gonna want that tie back. We then cut to Peter and Ben walking through the city, as Peter begins to ask how Ben's doing. Ben begins to just say, look, if you need to say something, just ask me how it is. Don't go being like, everyone is wondering what you're doing. I work at the newspaper business. And if there's something you want to say, just say it. Peter says fair enough, and just says he's worried about him. He asks why. What do you mean why? You won't talk about what happened. You haven't said anything. Not one word about how you're doing, how you feel. As Ben just goes on to say, Peter, when you were 15, when your parents died, you came to live with May and I. The first year was hard for you. Heck, it was hard for all of us. But we loved you unconditionally. We protected you. I tried to teach you about the world and prepare you for it. Well, May was better at all this kind of stuff, but the one thing we never tried to do was replace your parents, because we couldn't. Now, that was 20 years ago. It's been a long time. But has one day gone by that you don't think about them? Is there one day that it doesn't hurt that they're gone? As Peter just looks down and says, no. And Ben says, then there you have it. That's how I feel. As we now see a shot of a bunch of people in a park, as we then see a priest giving a speech in front of a memorial, with one of the names on this plaque being May Parker, revealing that Aunt May is dead in this universe and was killed by the blast that the Maker's Cabal ended up blasting onto New York and blamed on Tony Stark. And there are a lot of names on that list. And if you look closely, Norman Osborn is on there as well, and that comes into play in this chapter as well. A priest begins to give a speech about everything that is going on. I'm not going to read the entire thing because I'm short for time. But what you need to know is that this priest is actually Matt Murdock. Yeah, in this universe, Matt Murdock is not a blind lawyer, but a blind priest. This is an interesting thing. I'm going off on a tangent here, but this is a very interesting thing because a core part of Daredevil, of Matt Murdock as a character, is his faith in religion and Christianity. So I wonder how we're going to play with this if he inevitably does become Daredevil in the Ultimate Universe at some way, shape, or form, if we're getting all the previous heroes to jump into the fray again and get back on the track that they were originally supposed to be on. It's just an interesting thing to think about, so I just wonder how this will play out and be a conflict for him as a character. He goes on to talk about the people that were lost in the attack and wonders what's going on, why did Stark do this, but he was basically reported dead, so he's like, that disappeared along with him. He then calls over Norman Osborn, the son of Norman and Emily Osborn, so both of Harry's parents died in that attack as well. And he calls him up to the stand as he begins to do a speech. Speech about memories, how now that everybody is gone, all they're really left with them is memories. Memories of who they are, how they spend time together, and the precious memories as well. He even gives an example of himself and his father just playing catch. Neither of them liked baseball, but a memory that goes back to him is that when he thinks about it, all that was in there was his dad, himself, and the ball. The two of them and nothing else existed. He goes on to say that essentially that attack took away the future with the people that they loved, and now all they have left is memories. And it's just not enough. And he's not even sure if he should be expected to live with that. And that is the end of his speech, as we cut to later as Harry and Uncle Ben are shaking hands and talking. And apparently, MJ and Peter are talking about this situation as apparently Ben has interviewed Norman Osborn in the past, and he never really got to understand the real Norman Osborn before the attack happened and he passed. A really cool and interesting thing that is different from the other Spider-Man mythos is that Peter and Harry don't seem to be childhood friends in this universe for whatever reason. Could it just be the fact of certain things not happening, or maybe they drifted apart. As of this moment, it doesn't seem like they know of each other at all, so this is an interesting way to take Peter and Harry's relationship, as it does not seem that they're friends. Maybe they'll become friends in the future, eventual enemies, who knows. Again, a lot of interesting changes in this universe that I'm excited to see what they're going to do with. After Peter and MJ are done discussing about Norman, Peter asks if they're heading home, and Peter just says, well, I'm going to take a minute before I head back home, you guys go on without me. As we then cut back to the Daily Bugle. As Ben and Peter walk in, Jonah is throwing papers and storms out of the meeting office stating that he quits. He walks past Peter and Ben as he looks at them, with Ben telling Peter to go to his desk and keep his head down, as he says he'll catch up with him later. Ben walks into the boardroom as he meets everyone from the board, asking what he just missed. Robbie tells Ben that there was essentially some corporate restructuring of the paper, and Jonah didn't like that. And Ben's like, how do you feel about them? Robbie just says, well, I got 2 more years before I'm maxed out at my time here and I retire, so I don't really think about it. I think it might be a good idea. Ben says, sure, we all gotta have something to fight for. Mind if I ask what the changes are? Robbie goes on to explain that there's an ever-increasing number of complaints from our advertisers about some of our more inflammatory content. Specifically, and I apologize for bringing this up today, they're uncomfortable with how dodged the Bugle is while looking into the Stark terror attack, and they really don't care for the most recent direction of our coverage. So we're going to be making some changes at the behest of both the board and broader ownership in general. So turns out that Ben and the newspaper have been looking into this Stark attack to try and find more of the truth. Wonder why, most likely, allegedly, Stark did all this. Why all this happened, and so this is probably also a way for Ben to kind of find a reason as to why his wife had to die in such a horrible way. Maybe for him to get some closure, but also to find the truth, having both of these intersect. Ben goes on to ask, and how do you think I should feel about that? As he then cuts to Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, as he says, pleased at your good fortune. After all, nature abhors a vacuum. Ben asks what's that supposed to mean, as Fisk just says Jameson's out and now the paper needs new leadership. You were the obvious choice, and so I suppose congratulations are in order, Mr. Parker. It seems you've got yourself a promotion. That's if you want the job, of course. If you can, toe the line, as he smiles at Ben. Ben pauses for a moment, looks at Fisk, smiles, walks out of the office, and goes into the elevator with Jonah, as it is very heavily shown that he has also quit. As Ben just asks, so what are we gonna do now? As the two of them leave the building. We then cut to presumably a couple minutes or a few hours later, as Fisk and his eye-patch bodyguard, who does not look threatening or suspicious at all, ends up following him to his car. As then, right before he takes a seat, his car ends up exploding in front of him. As on the next page, we see what looks like the Green Goblin in an Iron Man-esque suit flying away on his glider, and looks back at the eye-patched bodyguard as Fisk is brought into the building. Who is this Green Goblin now that Norman is dead? Chances are it's probably Harry, but who knows? And why does he have this new look? I'm very curious to find out more about this character, and I feel like we'll get inklings of who this guy is as we progress through this run of Spider-Man. Then cut to the bar with no name, as Ben and Jonah are discussing on their plans on what to do next. And apparently they're deciding on starting up their own newspaper business go back to their roots, try and start things over and do things differently. Because, as Jonah said, he's been in the business for 30 years, and it is a dirty business. And Ben says the thing that they're going to have to do differently is tell the truth. Jonah thinks for a second, the truth, and then just bursts out laughing, stating that the truth, that's perfect. Thanks for that. As Ben's like, what, you don't agree? But Jonah says there are some things I like to believe in, that I'm not going to die alone, that there is such thing as justice. But in the entire universe, there's only one thing I know for sure, and that there's no truth in the news, and no news in the truth. So, like I said, it's a dirty business. So how about this? We promise not to lie. As Ben just says, sounds like a fair start. As Peter walks into the bar and joins them, he takes a seat and just says, I hope you two are enjoying yourselves. Everyone's running around the Bugle like someone set the place on fire. And I just like Jonah being proud of himself. I was like, it's what we do. And I just kind of like how he's proud that he caused some chaos and mischief just by leaving. I love Jonah. And if you do Jonah right, give him a good personality and a moral compass, he'll be a fantastic character. And I feel like this is where we're leaning with this version of Jonah, and I like how we're starting off that way. Apparently they gave Robbie the wheel of management right now, and he thinks he's going to do a good job. The real question is what they are going to do. They end up telling Peter that they're going to start up their own business again and do the paper. And even asking Peter if he wants to join. And Peter just says, you have any money? And Jonah just says, that's a day two problem, Peter. Tonight, I'm a man who is right with the world. As Jonah just walks over and says, thinking over, wishing the two of them good night. Peter asks Ben, how do you do it? How do you blow up your whole life in one afternoon and then just start a new one? Ben just says, Peter, my wife is dead, you're a grown man and have a family of your own. And given the opportunity, I just couldn't take being in an industry of compromise 1 minute more. Why wouldn't I do what I did? It was an easy choice. As he then looks at Peter and says, what's going on? And Peter just goes on to say, like, my wife is very much alive, I have a family and responsibilities that exceed professional bliss. I don't know that I can blow everything up just because I want my life to change. Ben goes on to say, Peter, no one's expecting you to join us. If you do, then that's great. But Peter just says, I'm not talking about that. This is something else. Ben obviously asks, are you and MJ okay? But Peter just says, we're great. She's great. I think she deserves better than me, but she disagrees, which makes it even better. As he goes on to say that it just feels like for the longest time, I've thought something was wrong with my life. That something was wrong with me. I can't really explain it, but now I just know that I've been right all along, and I don't know what to do. As Ben just looks over at Peter and says, you ever heard the saying, inaction is action? And Peter just says, yeah, sure. Ben goes on to say, well, that's just a garbage way of saying, don't spend your life waiting for something to happen. Make it happen. As Ben just says, I love you, but you're walking around half asleep, anesthetized by his own life. As he tells Peter, wake up. We then cut to later that night as Peter then begins to tuck his children into bed, as he then eventually meets MJ on the couch as they begin to start their talk that they promised to do in the morning. They begin the discussion with Uncle Ben and Jonah quitting the Daily Bugle. And he even goes on to say that afterwards I had to go and check on him, as MJ just says, you would have felt like you would have been worried all night, and it would have just gotten in the way of their inevitable conversation. MJ then asks the important question, what's wrong? As we get one image of Peter in the shadows as he just looks over at MJ and says, I don't want to say something and then not be able to take it back. MJ goes on to say, well, that's just how any of this works. But I do promise nothing's going to change how I feel about you or about us. So Peter says, I need a change. As MJ says, hey, when I quit to start my own business last year, you were 100% on board. And I mean, sure, we've got bills and kids and it might be tough, but why would you think for a second that I wouldn't be behind you doing something else? But Peter says, no, MJ, I mean, I need the change. And MJ's like, oh, that. As Peter's like, what do you mean that? As MJ's going to say, I know you, Peter Parker. You're an amazing husband and just lights out as a father. But you've been walking around for years with this cloud hanging over your head. You put a good face on it, but you're not satisfied with who you are. Do you know what you have to do? As Peter's like, I think so, I do. MJ then asks, are things going to change between us? As Peter, no hesitation, tells her, never. As happily as that makes MJ, she kisses Peter on the head and says, well then, that settles it. I'm going to bed. And tells Peter to go get him, Tiger. As we cut to Peter alone in the living room as MJ goes to bed, He pulls out the thing that was in his bag and walks towards the roof and looks down, as we get a flashback to the night before. Peter's working alone on the couch, finishing up some papers, as eventually this big flash of light appears. A box is teleported in the middle of his living room, saying for Peter Parker, that this is for Peter. As once Peter touches it, an image of Tony Stark's Iron Lad appears and says, "Hello. If this is gone as I hoped, I'm speaking with Peter Parker." He introduces himself as Tony Stark, and while it's likely you know my father's name, you've probably never heard of me. Peter says, "I got bad news. After what you did, everyone knows your name." But Stark reveals that this is just a pre-recorded message that he did, and he's from 6 months in the future. There was an attempt on him and his companion's life, and so they had to retreat before the cannon fired. As Stark goes on to say, "I'm sorry, but I can't be more specific than what I'm already doing, so we have to be careful. Because this world is more complicated and dangerous than you could ever believe. And there's a component of faith to this that is frankly unavoidable. All I can ask is that you can please listen carefully." The box opens up, revealing the sphere that Peter was holding onto earlier. As it goes on to say that it has a Picotech stealth suit to mask his identity and bioorganic catalyst necessary for him to undergo a post-human transformation. Peter's wondering what's going on, and Tony then begins to explain the fact that someone named the Maker manipulated time in order to stop a bunch of heroes from entering into this world. Going on to state the specific that Peter was supposed to be bitten by a radioactive spider 20 years ago and to become one of the world's greatest heroes. To go on to inspire people and be the world's protector, along with many others. And so he's basically repeating what he's doing with Peter to a multitude of other heroes that were supposed to be right here in this timeline after retrieving what he needed from the Maker's warehouse. So now we're most likely going to see repeats of this image and message with other heroes with the Ultimate Universe comic books. So that's a very interesting thing. And it's good to see that he's done this with multiple heroes. It goes on to say that since Peter was supposed to become one of these great heroes, but essentially that was taken from you. We then cut back to the present as the words of Tony Stark are ringing in Peter's head, stating that these people stole your future. These people robbed you of your destiny. The question is, do you want it back? As Peter touches the orb, it disappears, revealing the suit, as well as a vial containing the radioactive spider that was meant to bite him. He grabs the vial and says, "I want it." He thinks of Uncle Ben as to tell him to wake up. He removes the cap. He smiles. He thinks of MJ, saying, "Go get him, Tiger." As the spider then goes on his hand, bites him, and in the final panel, Peter is in his black stealth suit as he's now become the Ultimate Spider-Man, ending the beginning of the Ultimate Spider-Man run. And man, what an issue. This was very long. I'm probably going to be more summarized with future issues, but I really wanted to go a bit more in depth with this. I like the direction we're going with this new Ultimate Universe, where the Maker essentially basically stopped all the heroes from coming into existence, and starting off with Peter is honestly really great, because one of the first Marvel heroes that really took off in the original Marvel comic book line was Spider-Man. And Spider-Man has also always been a type of hopeful figure, somebody who, despite not only his powers or being a street level hero, always inspired people and was always like hopeful. He always stood back up, and he always had a desire to help people. And so, starting off with Peter, and that's just because with Spider-Man being the most popular superhero on Earth, basically, but because it is Peter. And I like how in this comic it shows that Peter has essentially always had this inkling that something was wrong, that something was missing, that his life wasn't complete. And now that he's got the opportunity, that he knows that his life was stolen from him, his life as Spider-Man, as a hero, as someone who helps people, and now he's got the opportunity to take it, he's going to take it and take that leap of faith. And just that final image just solidifies that this is going to be something special. If you haven't already, go buy the book. Buy it physically, buy it digitally, does not matter. Support this new comic line of Ultimate Comics, because it does feel like it's going to be a work of passion for a bunch of different writers and artists to bring their stories to life without having to worry about the mainline continuity. A brand new universe, a brand new storyline for every character and the world as a whole. And I cannot wait to see where this goes next. I might cover the next few issues in the next few months just to see how they do, and who knows. If you guys end up liking this, maybe I'll cover the Black Panther one alongside issue 2 of Spider-Man in February, and then eventually a new X-Men one. That one I want to talk about because that has a very unique art style, and it's following a different character leading up to the meetings of the X-Men. But what did you guys think of this comic? Do you like the direction we're going with here? Do you like this brand new take and origin for Spider-Man? as well as the different take on the universe and the Spider-Man mythos. Let me know in the comment section down below, as well as if you're excited for this new Ultimate line of Marvel Comics, and if you'd like to see me cover more stuff for Spider-Man or for Marvel as a whole. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe, hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. It really helps, and if you guys enjoy what I make here on the channel, and makes me motivated to make more. And with all that said and done, I hope you all have an awesome day.